If your account looks then you're in the right place. Here are tips I wished I knew sooner in Honkai Star Rail. Tip number 1, pull for the supports. Now I'm sure some of you out there have heard this too, but for the people in the back, I cannot emphasize this enough. Supports are the underrated carries for your account, and mostly the reason why people are able to zero cycle to begin with. But I have an E6 Castris. The more damage I do, the faster I clear. That's how the game works, Mischief. You're right. You're so right. That is how the game works. But there is so much a DPS can do to buff themselves before they need more damage. I have seen many players with E6 characters that are barely able to clear endgame content. Now, I can't share the IGNs for obvious reasons. DPS Eidolons mostly focus on improving their own quality of life or buffing their own damage multipliers. Support Eidolons, on the other hand, buff literally your entire account. I'm not even baiting you here. You can go check it out yourselves. Every support Eidolon has some way of enabling DPS characters to do more damage, since their Eidolons mostly focus on increasing how much damage enemies receive through debuffs. This could be from defense reduction, all-type rest pen, vulnerability, defense ignore, or simply enabling true damage. To put it into perspective, investing in supports not only increases your carry's multipliers even further, but they can also be used with other hyper carry characters on your account, and they also have a way better lifespan compared to DPS characters since they're pretty much released every single patch. This brings us to my next tip, and this is something that other content creators aren't telling you. Building pity is a complete lie. Now, I'm a keeper a buck, but I'm a victim of this. When it comes to playing any gacha game, especially Honkai Star Rail, I highly recommend you avoid building pity. Back in the day, I had this insane habit where I'd build pity or pull for 4-star characters for their Eidolons. And guess who I pulled? Jingliu and E1 Dill. To be fair though, I got E1 Dill pretty early too at 10 pity, and I got Jingliu at 75 because I wanted to get Tingyun at E6. All the day ones out there remember how broken she was. Even though I've got most of my 4 stars at E6, I haven't even used Dill or Jingliu to clear any content since their release, and we're already approaching 3.5. Even after the Jingliu buffs, I still haven't used that to clear any content at all. The same will go for Dill too, even after he gets buffed, because I'm gonna be honest, I have so much better options. Even though a limited character does seem appealing, let's be real, you aren't gonna pull them early. Even if you do, you'll probably either A, never end up using them, so they will be unnecessary for your account, or B, the DPS may be a downgrade over your other characters, because power creep is real. Cope all you want. On top of that, the chances of pulling for a limited character is extremely low before reaching soft pity. And another thing to consider is having the right teammates for your account, because let me tell you something, I've seen some people run Sparkle with Kafka in the same comp recently too to clear MOC, and that was terrifying. There is also a chance of losing your 50-50. For newer players, losing 50-50 isn't that bad as it was before, since you can now choose who you lose your 50-50 to, but that's besides the point. But Mischief, I have a good feeling about this one. Yeah, well, that's what all the in-closet gamblers say before they pull for Bailu. My next tip is understanding horizontal and vertical investment. With the last 2 tips I've given out, some of you are probably thinking, this guy is saying we should only pull for supports. Well, yes, and at the same time, no. Vertical investment is mainly focusing on less characters but having more Eidolons, whereas horizontal investment is mainly focusing on having a lot of characters for different scenarios such as AoE or single target. The purpose of pulling for Eidolons, especially for DPS, is to improve the longevity so they don't deal clown level damage when clearing endgame content, whereas pulling for support Eidolons is to buff any of your carry's damage even higher. Let's take my Kafka team for example. I've been using this team consistently since 1.4, and just to remind you, we're on 3.4 or 3.5, and I've invested a lot of my resources into this team to keep up with the meta. At first, I was pulling for Kafka and Black Swan's Eidolons. Kafka should be E2 and my Black Swan at E1. I own Runmate too, but I did not pull for Eidolons or Litecoin either. It wasn't until Robin's second rerun that I started to see how broken supports are, and the difference is night and day. Although both horizontal and vertical investment have their benefits, if you want a zero cycle, then you're gonna have to start vertical investing. While pulling for newer characters to keep up with endgame content is easy, that and fueling your gambling addiction, you have to bear in mind that there is a chance of losing 50-50, so your account can end up being bricked for months. On the other hand, by saving up rolls and pulling for Eidolons, you'll have an even higher chance of getting what you want, as well as having characters not being power crept as hard. With all that talk about pulling for characters out of the way, let's talk about relics. Self-modeling resin is probably one of the hardest resources to manage. With all the options you have available to you, some of you out there are probably overwhelmed with what to pick. Now this is just me personally, but I'd mainly use my self-modeling resin to get energy regen ropes or snuffing out the weakest relic on the character. Now you can probably see where I'm going with this. You definitely want to prioritize on building supports over DPS. The reason for this, it's extremely difficult to pull for energy regen ropes, especially if you aren't using wishful resin to choose speed substats. Now there may be some cases where you already have good substats on your supports, otherwise I think it's okay to use self-modeling resin for DPS characters. Obviously you have to be 110% sure, because I don't want to be responsible for griefing your account, that's on you. But if you're very sure you want to spend your self-modeling resin on your DPS, then you should focus on what's the weakest relic on that character. For example, my Firefly is thriving at 191% break effect, and she's pretty stacked on her relics too, not gonna lie. But if I want to take her a step further, I can go through my relics, see which one is the weakest, which in my case is her boots, and use my self-modeling resin and wishful resin to get speed boosts with break effect. Now bear in mind, RNG is still involved here, so there is a chance this may go horribly wrong. Again, I am not responsible for trolling your account. There may also be a scenario where you have a variable dice. Now I'm a keeper a buck, don't invest in these. For whatever reason, if you do have it, I suggest having a spare relic with similar stats to the main relic on the character you're trying to fix. This is something that took me a while to adjust to, especially since I'm a gambler like the rest of you. Farming traces over relics is a big must when building the best account possible. This is mainly because traces are guaranteed upgrades for a character, whereas relics on the other hand involve a ton of RNG. And if things don't go as expected, then you've basically wasted your resin until it's capped again. The way leveling up traces works, there are different trace priorities for different roles that you should always aim to do. For DPS characters, you should mainly prioritize maxing out all the traces to ensure you get the most damage possible from your carry. However, there are instances where leveling up a basic attack isn't necessary, but I'm going to recommend leveling it up anyway because you deserve the best. For support characters, you generally want to max out the traces, but if you're really starved of materials, then you can leave some traces at 8 and level up the relevant traces before maxing everything out. But if you're really starved of materials, then you can leave some traces at level 8 and level up the relevant traces before maxing everything out. For sustained characters, you can level up dead traces to a point where you can comfortably clear content without getting folded, but at some point you want to max out everything to gain the most value out of their healing. Now if you aren't sure what talents you should level up, then you can press this button over here and it will recommend what you should prioritize. So in case the people at the back are wondering why they aren't doing damage, you now know why. Level up your traces. If you want to see more tips like these, then make sure to like, comment and subscribe, because there's a bunch of other tips that I have yet to share. Now obviously with all these tips I've shared with you, you aren't instantly going to start zero cycling. This takes time and requires tons of discipline to not pull for the characters. Now I'm a keeper a buck, I've yapped too much, so I'll see you in a bit.